Thank you, Vala, and thanks everyone for attending this webinar. I think that before I kickstart the presentation, I would like to say that full understanding of the MRV framework is key at this specific time for two reasons. First, because it provides the basis for countries to identify what are the technical as well as the financial efforts that may be required today to meet international standards regarding MRV. And second, because it sets a departure point for the current climate change negotiations. And in some cases, this framework is used as well as a reference point for country-specific programs on climate change, on reducing emissions. So it is very useful, it is important, and it's a framework that should be known by practitioners and by people who are also involved in climate change negotiations themselves. So in this short presentation, we will go over those key elements of this package of MRV decisions under the UNFCCC for non-Annex 1 countries, as well as some of their practical implications for us developing countries. So as we go through it, I encourage you to take note of your comments and questions so we can discuss and address them at the end, as Bava said. Okay, so let's first have a look at those elements that constitute the existing MRV arrangements for developing countries parties under the convention. So we have a monitoring component or measurement component, a reporting component, and then a verification component. And there are different levels for this MRV framework to be applied. So there's some provisions or elements of this overall UNFCCC framework which are applied at the international level. And there are some of these elements which are meant to be implemented by countries at a more domestic or national level. So let's go through these key elements briefly, and then we will dive into some of them with more detail. So at the international level, there are provisions on measurement and reporting related to two main instruments. The first one are national communications, which are the reports which were established by the convention and are meant to set out or lay out information on how countries are implementing the convention, specifically in what is related to measurement of greenhouse gas emissions and removals and the steps taken to implement the convention, and that includes mitigation, adaptation, as well as a summary of the support received, the support that is required, capacity building needs, national circumstances, and other key pieces of information regarding the implementation of the framework convention. Then after, this is a framework which has evolved gradually. We have the biennial update reports, which have a stronger focus on greenhouse gas inventorying or measurement of those emissions and removals, and reporting on the progress countries have made in implementing mitigation actions, that is, actions to reduce emissions. So although those, and in addition, the support the country has received and the support the country requires to continue to implement such actions. So in summary, we have these two big reports which are the main instruments for countries to report, to state, to present information on how they are implementing the convention. The measurement part is mainly related to the measurement of greenhouse gas emissions and removals. So there are no decisions under the convention itself on which on the methodologies to be applied. They only set the standard for it. So this relies mostly on other institutions' methodologies. For the greenhouse gas inventories, it's the IPCC. Of course, countries could have their own methodologies as long as they are consistent with this IPCC guidance. So on the domestic side, there are some elements stemming from these decisions which should be applied at the national level. There is a decision which was achieved in Warsaw in COP19 regarding how countries could start implementing domestic arrangements for MRV of domestically supported NAMAs, or nationally appropriate mitigation actions. So this is a general decision which provides an overall very broad framework for countries to start devising and applying arrangements for mitigation at a domestic level. In addition, there is a provision to report on domestic MRV, to report on such arrangements within the BUR. So parts or components of the international reporting come directly from those processes which are being undertaken at a national level. So in a certain way, it's about telling the convention what your emissions are, what the removals are, but also what you're doing at the domestic level to address such emissions, what are your mitigation actions, and what are the arrangements behind those actions. And at a more specific level, which is at the bottom of this graph, is the MRV framework for RED+, which, as some of you may know, is a voluntary application for those countries who want to participate on the RED+ mechanism. There are some key elements which are common between the framework we have just addressed and the RED+ framework. However, it's sort of a different world, so it has its own set of decisions as well as its own set of progress, although there are some common elements to it regarding, for instance, verification. So the last key element of this diagram is the ICA, which is the international verification process, which is meant to facilitate countries to be more transparent, to enhance the transparency of the overall MRV process, and especially in what is related to the reporting of greenhouse gas emissions and progress made towards mitigation nationally. So these are basically the core or key elements of this MRV framework. Okay, so the next couple of slides show the main differences and common elements to those key instruments developing countries have for reporting under the Framework Convention. The first one is, as I mentioned, national communications, which are to be submitted every 4 years by countries. And the second is BURs, which, as its name states, is meant to be presented every 2 years. So there are some common elements as well. However, in general terms, we could say that BURs are more strict or a bit more complex instrument for reporting, as it sort of sets the bar a bit higher in comparison to national communications, specifically in what it's related to mitigation and the greenhouse gas inventories and the minimum standards that must be complied with in each of these reports. So in both of them, it's a requirement to report on national circumstances. BURs have an additional component of description of the institutional arrangements countries have developed to support the preparation of BURs on a continuous basis. And then we have, of course, greenhouse gas inventories as one of the key parts of both reports. However, if you look at national communications, the standards are less stringent or less strict than in BURs. So the IPCC guidance that should be used for greenhouse gas inventories is 1996 in national communications. And the use of good practice guidance, both for uncertainty and for LULUCF components, is only encouraged in national communications. So it's an optative element for countries from the standpoint of what it says in the decision of national communications. Then when national communications started, a base year or an initial year for the greenhouse gas inventories was set. So for initial national communications, 1994 or 1990 was allowed, and then for the second national communication, 2000 was the minimum year that should be reported. Tables 1 and 2 containing that decision on the top of the table are encouraged. If you look at the decision, if you look at these guidelines of national communications, those are summary tables, which are really the minimum a country should present in order to render out the results of the greenhouse gas inventory. Then sectoral tables from the IPCC guidelines and worksheets used to prepare the greenhouse gas inventory and undertake calculations are only encouraged, so it's not mandatory to present those. And then information on methodologies is also encouraged. So which methods were used to present and prepare the greenhouse gas inventory. In BURs, although the mandatory guidelines or minimum guidelines that should be applied are 1996 IPCCs, I have to say that I have gone through 5 or 6 BURs during technical analysis already. Most of them are applying, if not all of them are applying 2006 guidelines already. However, what the decision says is that 1996 is the minimum that should be adopted. And the good practice from the IPCC, 2000 and 2003, it's a should. So this is something that should be applied by countries. It's not an encouragement. It's a requirement that it's stronger in the context of BURs. The inventory year for every BUR should not be more than 4 years prior to submission or later. So when the first BURs were meant to be presented, which was 2014, then the inventory year as a minimum should have been 2010, and so on. Tables 1 and 2 from the National Communications Decision, they should be applied. So this is a requirement. Annex the Annex 3A.2 of IPCC Good Practice Guidance on 2003, which are sectoral tables for LULUCF, providing more detailed information on calculations within that sector, are encouraged. Summary information tables of inventories for previous submissions years, so years which have been submitted in earlier BURs or national communications, are encouraged too. Additional information supporting the inventory can also be included. It's an encouragement, as well as, for the first time, a provision of a consistent time series back to the years which have been reported in the national communications. And this becomes, although it's an encouragement, it becomes really important because it allows for consistency in the greenhouse gas inventory the country has developed over time. So if any changes are made in methodologies, then this provision allows for the time series to be recalculated and the inventory to be comparable for the country across time. There is a very important difference between these two, whereas the national communications are not subjected to ICA, so they are not subjected to the international verification process. BURs are subjected to ICA. So this is why, in a certain sense, guidance for BURs is more detailed, and if you wish, a bit more complex, because these are looked at by experts and they are analyzed, as we will see a bit further in the presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, so then we have another key component of national communications and BURs, which is the mitigation component. Earlier in national communications, there is an overall requirement to present the descriptions on the steps taken to mitigate what are the programs and measures which are being implemented by a country. There is an invitation to present requirements, methods, assessments, how it was done, and for the BURs, it is very important to see that the elements that should be reported are different and sort of set a standard to provide more information or additional information in comparison with what's being presented in national communications. So methodologies and assumptions used to calculate mitigation potentials, to estimate how much a program or a project has reduced in terms of emissions are or should be reported within the BUR. The objectives of a proposed or a mitigation action which is already being implemented, and the steps taken or envisaged to achieve that action should also be included in the report. Progress of implementation and the underlying steps taken or envisaged, and the results achieved. International market mechanisms, so how a country is participating in international market mechanisms for emissions, and as well as a description of the domestic MRV arrangements as we saw earlier within those MRV provisions, this in accordance to that decision of COP19. So it is a bit more complex, although it's broad guidance. It takes the elements of reporting regarding mitigation a bit further from what was established initially for national communication. So this implies an additional challenge for countries to start assessing and collecting information on what is happening in the country in terms of mitigation actions. Then the component of adaptation is not explicitly contained in the BURs, and it's not something that is explicitly stated in the guidelines for BURs. This is something that remains, or that is a key part of national communications. However, this does not prevent countries, of course, of including relevant information on adaptation and vulnerability within the BURs if that is something they wish to do. However, this is not contained in the guidance. Then there's another important element. National communications have the requirement to present constraints and gaps and the related financial, technical, and capacity needs. And then BURs have this matching part as well, but there is an additional thing to it, and it is that the support received for climate change action in general must be described and presented. This has proven to be one of the most challenging areas of BURs because it's new. So developing countries have received a lot of support, international cooperation, many agencies, many programs and projects are working at the country level. And in many cases, countries have not collected systematically information on who is collaborating, what the funds are, who are administrating those funds, etc. So then we are all faced with this challenge of collecting this information, putting together this information, and reporting it systematically every 2 years to the convention. This is something that is very new and has proven to be very challenging for countries. Then other relevant information such as technology transfer, research and systematic observation, education, communications on climate change is part of national communications. This is listed under any other information relevant to the BURs in the BURs guidelines. So this could be included, but is not a mandatory element. So as you see, the main focus of BURs compared to national communications is mitigation actions and greenhouse gas inventories. As mentioned, submission would be for BURs every 2 years, and for national communications every 4 years. When BURs are presented or coinciding year with national communications, the BUR could be presented as an annex to the national communication. Next, please. Okay, so we just had this overview on the main instruments for reporting and implicitly measurement. Now I want us to take a look at what international consultation and analysis is, or ICA. ICA, it's the verification process we developing countries have faced for the first time under the convention. And as I mentioned earlier, its key objective is that of enhancing transparency of mitigation actions. But on a personal note, I think that besides this objective of enhancing transparency, it also has a lot of elements which are useful for developing countries to aid accelerating and improving national processes. So it's not only about enhancing transparency at an international level, but also enhancing it domestically for internal purposes, which may be of use for governments, for private institutions and other actors to plan for climate change action. Okay, so after the submission of BURs to the convention by countries, the process of international consultation and analysis starts, and it does have two main steps. The first one is the technical analysis of BURs, and the second one is a facilitative sharing of views. So I think that we will go in more detail through them later. But in general, the technical analysis comprises, in a way, the analysis or technical evaluation of the BUR. This is done by a team of technical experts in conjunction, of course, with the country team, with the party. This is a process which is constructive, is meant to be non-intrusive, non-punitive. It is more intended to help the country identify areas for further improvement in regards to greenhouse gas inventories, mitigation, and so on. So this is sort of a constructive, I would say, very friendly process, which can be of a lot of use for countries themselves. And then we have the facilitative sharing of views, which is more about interacting with other parties after the technical analysis has happened, interacting with other parties, showcasing the progress of countries regarding reporting, regarding mitigation, regarding other components which might be of national importance, and to also receive some information or lessons learned from others, which is, of course, useful and constructive for the overall process at the national level. So let's have a look at the steps in more detail. Okay, so once a BUR is submitted by a non-Annex 1 party, the technical analysis is triggered. This technical analysis has several different stages or phases. The first one, it's a preparatory phase in which the Secretariat of the UNFCCC first prepares or puts together a team of technical experts who are responsible for the analysis of the BUR. This team is built in accordance to the UNFCCC decisions, more concretely the decisions from Warsaw on MRV, and it follows clear guidance on who should be part of the team. In general, it should be a balanced team from the regional standpoint, so there should be a representation from people everywhere as far as it's possible, and there should always be, as a priority, if possible, members of the CGE as part of the team. These teams are led by experts from Annex 1 and non-Annex 1 countries, so there's guaranteed that there will be balance in this analysis. And of course, experts from the different fields of expertise which are related to BURs, greenhouse gas inventories, mitigation actions, support, are selected from the roster of experts of the UNFCCC. This is a very constructive process. I would say that one of the best ways to build capacities in the country is to nominate experts to the roster of experts. There is no other way to learn this in a better manner than involving people in this process. So I encourage you to do so. So the team of technical experts, what it does is to look at the BURs, following, of course, the BURs guidance and the guidance for undertaking this technical analysis, and determine or identify to what extent this information which has been reported by countries in BURs is in line with what is being established in the Convention's decision. So it's not about evaluating how policies are being implemented or how countries choose or not an effort or an action or a path to comply or to apply or implement the Convention at the national level. It's only about assessing or identifying at what degree or at what level those provisions in the decision for BURs have been reflected and included in the report presented by the country. This preparatory phase also comprises a bit of an exchange, previous exchange between the party and the team of technical experts. So a few preliminary technical clarification questions are formulated by the country, and then they are by the team of technical experts, and then they are submitted to the party in order to provide answers. Ideally, these answers should be provided before the technical analysis takes place, because it provides more information for the analysis to be undertaken. There will not be that many questions remaining, so the process will be overall will be quicker and will be streamlined, to say so. Then after the preparatory phase comes the technical analysis week, which happens in Bonn. Usually each team has to analyze 2 or 3 BURs depending on their complexity, the technical analysis is mainly about what I just said, to identifying to which degree the report complies with the decisions on BURs, and interacting with the party as well. There is this space within that week of technical analysis of a phone call or a teleconference between the team of technical experts and the party. So there can be an exchange of technical issues, things that need further clarification, things that the team of technical experts may have identified but is still not sure and wants to confirm that these appreciations are accurate. So it's friendly, it's a constructive space, and it is more about clarification and identification of capacity building needs with the country than anything else. So it's more about identifying what the key challenges have been for the country and so on. Then after the technical analysis stage, the preparation of a summary report which presents the main findings of the technical analysis starts. This process is done with the country, is done by the team of technical experts with assistance from the UNFCCC Secretariat and with the country. So at the end, you have a summary report which reflects the views and the findings from the team of technical experts, as well as the views from the party. So this has to be agreed between the parts who are participating in this process. And then this report at the end, it's published on the UNFCCC website. It's accessible, it's just next to the BURs. So you have your report, and then you have the summary report of the technical analysis, and can be downloaded and seen by everyone. Next, please. Okay, so after the technical analysis, there is this phase of exchange and interaction between parties during the FSV process. So parties who have submitted the BURs and have already undertaken the technical analysis and have a published summary report, they can participate in a workshop and then showcase their actions taken to reduce emissions, present challenges, indicate what their needs and gaps are and what support they have received and is still required. This takes the form of a workshop during the SBI with presentations of countries addressing the key elements of BURs, addressing questions too that may come from the floor. The interaction starts before that session. There is 1 month period in which countries may submit written questions for those parties who are undergoing the FSV, and also some questions may be also raised during the workshop, which takes place during SBI in the negotiations. Next, please. Okay, so just to wrap up the presentation, I just wanted to highlight some of the benefits of the ICA process and how which may be seen by some countries or at a first impression as a process which will be analyzing and which will be maybe evaluating and overall which might be seen as just something new, can be also used for domestic process. As mentioned, the ICA is meant to be non-punitive, non-intrusive, must respect national sovereignty, and is also focused on identifying with countries what are their main needs and gaps, and what are the related capacity building needs. So, departing from this point, I would say that ICA process is for countries who are doing this for the first time, a unique opportunity to establish a facilitative, a constructive technical exchange with the UNFCCC experts who have been working on this expertise field for years, and can actually provide some insights on what you're presenting in your reports, which may be useful for future improvement. It also provides, ICA provides arguments to further strengthen institutional arrangements at home. So you are being asked for information as a country on your institutional arrangements. Somebody, the international community, in a way, is analyzing this. So this is now, it wasn't looked at by anyone with national communication. Now it's being looked at. So this provides a strong incentive for countries to improve on what they're doing on climate change. So if, as it is my case, this is from personal experience, if you work at the Environment Ministry, at an environmental agency, which are by nature sort of weaker than other ministries in the country, this provides a strong argument for the Ministry of Environment or whatever agency is in charge of these reports to push for improvement, for funds, and for further national support to take these processes forward. Then the ICA also provides an opportunity to showcase and to show how much you've done as a country to address climate change. There are many things and projects and initiatives and programs happening everywhere, but somehow it is hard to take those messages and lessons learned across. So this is a very good opportunity to mention this, to get other countries, Annex 1 countries, international organizations to see the progress you've made and what you require to do even more. And then it's a process of preparation and adjustment. So we will have a few years until new guidance under the Paris Agreement is developed. We don't know how this is going to look like. However, this says the Paris Agreement. These arrangements we have today will serve as a basis for the arrangements in the future. So this, in a certain way, is a preparatory period for us to start adjusting the processes at the national level in order to be able to report more transparently, robustly, and more systematically. Next, please. And then I wanted to show a little example from my country on how this process can stimulate continuous improvement. So I took the greenhouse gas inventory for Colombia, which started being an inventory with very high uncertainties in certain sectors, and was limited in its coverage in time, as it was only for years 1990, 1994 for the first national communication, which was presented in 2000. it would also only apply IPCC on a Tier 1 reporting level, because there were no methodologies developed at the country, no emission factors for the country. So this was like the most basic attempt we had to build a greenhouse gas inventory. Then things improved slightly for second national communication. However, there was like this huge gap of time between one and the other. We continue to apply IPCC guidance, Tier 1 methods to estimate emissions. But then when we jumped onto the first BUR, we really had like this quantum leap and started applying 2006 guidelines. We developed the ways and the means to report on Tier 2 for the key categories of the inventory. So the ones that produce the largest share of emissions are being reported on Tier 2 now, with country-specific emission factors. And then we included years 2010 and 2012. And then for the third national communication, which has not yet been submitted to UNFCCC, it will be soon, but it has been already launched nationally. We included a full time series, which goes back to the first 2 years we presented in the national communication, the first national communication. We continue to apply the 2006 IPCC guidelines, and we developed inventory improvement plans. This is very important. This is the key part of this example, because we went through technical analysis in 2015. And one of the things that we learned from that process is that we need to set steps to continuously improve on those specific subcategories of the inventory which are still having problems of information, high uncertainty in emission factors, and so on. So we developed very detailed improvement plans. So every time that we present a BUR, we have something new to present and points in which we can show improvement, as well as a better instrument to follow up emissions at a national level for policy purposes. So this would be the example. I think this ICA process really sets an incentive and stimulates improvement processes. I hope in your countries too. I think we have an additional slide on some material that could be useful. Can we turn to the next slide, please? Thank you. I listed here 3 sources which are very, very useful for countries who are preparing for or in the process of ICA technical analysis, preparation of reports. One of them is the Handbook on MRV for Developing Countries, which provides a very good summary made by the Secretariat on the MRV framework. So the presentation we had today, but a bit expanded and going into more detail. Then the web pages in which national communications and FSV reports, as well as BURs, are uploaded and are available, are of key importance, because what other countries are doing, it's a very good reference for a country to do as well. Very constructive. There is very useful information in those reports too. So have a look at them if you are in the process. This is a high encouragement. Next, please. And lastly, I think that I'll hand it over to Baba, but just to mention that the CGE has developed a very comprehensive set of training materials on all the different components of BURs, of national communications. This includes adaptation, vulnerability, greenhouse gas inventories, mitigation, and they are available in various languages and can be downloaded at any time from any point with internet connection. So those are the links, and I highly invite you to have a look if you are intending to do some capacity building at the country level. This could be a good basis for it.